do was welcome you to the future and also welcome you to Carnarvon. It amused me greatly that this room that we're in is named after a small and slightly scruffy town in northwest Wales, which happens to be where I grew up and went to school. I learned two very important things as part of my secondary education. One was the importance of always wearing the right uniform, and the other was that the thinking, especially outside the box, and having ideas, is dangerous and subversive, and should be discouraged at all costs. So we're slightly flying in the face of those very important tenets of education that my school passed on to me. And I would really like to encourage you to think outside the box and to feed those thoughts back to us today, but also as part of the ongoing consultation that Raptor referred to. I didn't know it was a Thelma and Louise strip, and I'm really hoping that it doesn't end up with a nasty accident and a cliff at the end of it.
I was thinking more about Brad Pitt myself.
Those of you who are members and will have read your latest edition of the Archaeologist magazine will have seen the feature that we ran asking archaeologists to come up with job descriptions for future roles in the year 2050. And apart from being a slightly amusing and creative article in the magazine, it was actually quite interesting how difficult it was to get archaeologists to think about the future. And I suppose we could think in terms of cliches that we spend so much time thinking about the past that actually projecting ourselves into some kind of imaginary future world is quite difficult. It also seemed to engender quite a lot of antagonism, because we had a lot of comments from people saying, well, how can we possibly think about the future when there's so much wrong now? And when we've got all these problems, how can we just sort of skirt round them or brush them under the carpet and imagine some kind of utopian world? But in a way, if we can't do that, I don't see how we will ever be able to resolve the issues and the challenges that we have at the moment. So there is an opportunity in this session to talk about some of those issues, but we would really like to focus on the solutions rather than actually what has caused problems, on what they are now. I think we've probably rehearsed that quite a lot in the past. And I think the other perception that we have is that we don't really feel in control of how our profession develops, that a lot of factors that drive the way that we do things are actually external and that we can't control them. And I think that's certainly going forward and talking about ideas about chartered archaeologists and how we might want to see our profession develop in the next 20 or 30 years. I think we need to challenge those impressions and those preconceptions, because we do have an opportunity now to shape the way the profession develops with Charter. The Charter itself, and you will have seen it hopefully downstairs, is essentially a big lump of plastic that means absolutely nothing. It's what we do with it that actually counts, and I think that's down to us, and we'd like to start that conversation in this room today and then carry it forward over the next year or so. So I think a lot of the work that we've been doing up to this point has really been putting building blocks in place. And a lot of the work that we've been involved in on training and development side of things at CIfA has been putting building blocks in place that we can now use to develop the ideas about career pathways, about the future structures of our profession, the future qualifications, skills needs that archaeologists will have. We don't have to start from scratch, and we don't have to reinvent wheels. And I think the session this afternoon, looking at the futures of their professions, we'll look at some of the structures that are already in place and some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges that other institutes have faced in the past going along this route. I think we're very good actually at trying to reinvent wheels and feeling that solutions developed by other people aren't necessarily appropriate for us. And again, I think that's something that would be interesting to discuss a bit more later on. But it does feel like, or it certainly feels to me at the moment, that we have a huge opportunity to think about career pathways and directions in our profession, starting out with, potentially with a school leaver being able to make a choice whether they undertake an academic programme, maybe through an accredited degree structure linked to membership of the Chartered Institute, or potentially an apprenticeship route in the future. That's something that's not too far off at the moment, we hope. Or indeed to have a very flexible career structure where periods of working in archaeology might be alternated with periods of doing other things, and where learning and skills are accredited through continued professional development and through vocational qualifications that we already have. And that all those things linked together and underpinned by national occupational standards and linked to membership of the Chartered Institute would actually give us that career structure that we've been looking for. And I think when we're talking about chartered status for individuals, it's very much in the context of that career pathway. It's not something that's an extra or something completely different that sits outside our existing validation processes, membership processes, and the work that we've done to date on skills and training. We've spent a little bit of time, not very much so far, and we will be spending a lot more time looking at what other chartered institutes do who already have the power to confer chartered status on their members. And there's quite a variation, and those of you who are already members of other chartered bodies will know this. There's quite a variation in the processes that they use. Some of them are quite surprisingly old school in terms of time served, that you have to have been a member for a certain length of time before you can apply to be chartered. Some of them still use exam-based systems, although they're becoming fewer and further in between now. Some of them use systems of supported CPD, where a member signs up to a chartered pathway and goes through, undertakes a pre-defined period of supported CPD and learning with a mentor, and at the end of it, that having achieved that, chartered status is conferred on them. And we will have an opportunity to look at all those different systems and decide what, if any, is appropriate to us in terms of the size of the profession that we are, the resources that we have as an institute, and as part of that to make sure that any system that we come up with is rigorous and trustworthy, but is also accessible to as wide a range of people who might wish to be chartered and who can meet the standards. And I think that's something that we're very conscious of, that there needs to be sufficient flexibility in all sorts of career routes to allow all kinds of different people to engage with the Chartered Institute, potentially with chartered status in the future. So in terms of the consultation process, and I think those of you who were here for the opening address yesterday morning, it must have been yesterday, will have heard Tim, my colleague Tim Howard, talking about how refreshing it was in his work on the consultation process for the Heritage Bill in Wales to actually engage in a consultation that was a genuine consultation. And the first thing I'd like to say is that this consultation is very much a genuine consultation. We may all individually have our own ideas about how we would like to see things develop in the future, but none of that is fixed and firm, and there are lots of issues, and just actually in conversations that we've been having around conference in these last couple of days have thrown up questions that we might not have considered and ideas. So I think there is a real genuine opportunity at this point to shape how we want this to go forward. In terms of timescale, it's not something that's going to happen overnight at all. The timescale, the process, if we do decide that we want to be able to confer chartered status on our members, will involve applying to the Privy Council office again to amend the charter, and that in itself is going to be a lengthy process. The administration side of that is likely to take a couple of years potentially. So this isn't something that's going to happen next year or the year after. And we feel very strongly that it's important to take the time to consider what the options are and to listen to members and non-members and people who engage with our sector in other areas and professions we work alongside to make sure that we get this right, because I think that's the crucial thing. If we have to wait another 5 years, then it's worth that time to make sure that we are really happy with the system that we've got and that it works for us. So, as Raksha mentioned, we will be touring the country over the next 6 months or so. We'll be setting up a number of consultation workshops around throughout the UK, which will be open to all of you to attend. We'll also be filming, hopefully, those sessions, and also trying to come up with different ways to get other people to engage, people who can't attend the workshops, to engage with the consultation process. So again, if you have any innovative ideas about how we might do that and the means that we might use, that would be really, really useful to hear about. Now, there are lots of things that we might want to talk about in those consultation sessions, and obviously, as with all of these things, the devil is always in the detail. But actually, for me, there are 3 big questions, and we don't know the answers to these questions at the moment, and this is what we need to find out. And I think the first one is, what's chartered status for? What is a chartered archaeologist for? What does one do? Why do we need it? And I think that's the first thing. It's not just about a badge and a name. We actually need to understand ourselves what we want this status to do, if that's the direction that we're going to head into. We also need to think very carefully about who needs to be chartered. At what level is that appropriate? And the 2 questions link very, very closely. If we don't understand what it's for, we don't know who needs to be one. So I think that's the second question. And then the third question is, having answered the first 2, how do they get there? What do we want them to do? How do we pitch that level of rigour and accessibility? And what are the systems that we need to put in place to assess and be able to confer chartered status? And also how that fits in with our existing membership and validation processes. So what I'd like you to do is to keep those questions in mind, and hopefully the presentations and the discussions that we have today will spur you into thinking creatively and outside the box, and possibly even dangerously subversively, which I'd simply like to encourage some dangerous subversion at some point. Keep these questions in mind, and hopefully the discussion later on will be a lively one. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Bill Moffat, who's our first speaker from Wessex Archaeology, who is going to be talking about using the tools we have to build the careers we want.